Welcome to the latest episode of our podcast series for financial advisors. Today's episode is The Buck Starts Here, ex-Edward Jones advisor on his leap to independence. It's a conversation with Glenn Israel, CEO and founder of GFI Wealth Partners. I'm Jason Diamond, and this is the Diamond Podcast for Financial Advisors.
At Diamond Consultants, our mission is to help advisors live their best business life. We want every elite advisor to find exactly the right place for their business and their clients to thrive, whether it's at a wirehouse, a regional, boutique, or independent firm. As the industry's leading recruiters and consultants, we've transitioned more than $250 billion in assets under management in the past decade, and each year, 25% of transitioning advisors who manage $1 billion or more are our clients. If you'd like to talk, please feel free to give us a call at 908-879-1002. Are you a financial advisor who's curious about whether you're in the best place to serve clients, or if there might be a better way to optimize your business for the future? Should I Stay or Should I Go is a new book that serves as a self-guided journey, walking you through the key steps that Diamond Consultants takes with our advisor clients, whether considering change or not. Visit diamond-consultants.com/thebook to learn more.
Coming to the realization that you, the advisor, are responsible for every aspect of your business is often the turning point in many careers. Because ultimately, you're the one who drives the bus and makes the decisions on how clients are served, when to hire staff, what products and services to offer, the list goes on. That is, unless you are limited to what the firm or model dictates. Then the biggest decision you need to make is whether the firm you work for allows you to serve your clients and grow your business without limitation. For Glenn Israel, the reality that the buck stops here drove his decision to leave the practice he built at Edward Jones and make the leap to independence. Glenn followed a fairly common progression in wealth management before opting to build an independent firm. He began his journey at Merrill, starting as an intern and working his way up. Then Glenn moved on to Edward Jones, where he built the business to some $215 million in assets. It was 13 years later that Glenn decided it was time to make a change, and that not only did the buck stop with him, it started with him. So he made the leap to independence in July of 2022, launching GFI Wealth Partners under the Raymond James umbrella. In this episode, Glenn talks about his journey and the decision to leave Edward Jones to become a business owner. He talks about how having his own independent firm has not only opened up a new world of opportunity for client service, but also changed his own growth trajectory. Glenn talks about the ability to grow and nurture his team as he sees fit, and how as an independent, he no longer is limited by what he calls confinement, and much more. There's a lot to discuss, so let's dive in. Glenn, thank you so much for joining me. Thrilled to have you on.
Jason Diamond, thanks so much for the opportunity to speak about all I have to say.
Absolutely. So to start with, do you mind just walking us through your background? What brought you to the world of wealth management? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, Jason. So my family taught me great things like manners, the art of speaking. They gave me confidence out in the world. But some of the things that were lacking were making good financial decisions at some point. So this was something of a call of action for me, something that I can help the community make good decisions, be methodical, be thoughtful, and have great outcomes. Also, this is a relationship business, which I love. I incidentally am helping investors with investment products and services and their goals, but I love being involved in a relationship and helping them. And so this is right up my alley.
Yeah, it sounds great. I think that's a pretty common refrain we hear from a lot of our guests. Didn't necessarily grow up with strong finance backgrounds, but nevertheless ended up either by coincidence or by fate, ended up in this world. And I think it's the best industry in the world. So you've transitioned somewhat recently, and I want to make that the focal point of the episode. But before we dive into the details of your transition, can you tell us a little bit about your current firm, GFI Wealth Partners? What services do you provide? Who do you serve? Give us some context on the size of the business.
Absolutely, Jason, would love to. So there's 6 of us. We're serving about 500 planning clients over 30 states. We act as financial planners. We're very intentional about that title because we're not here doing an investment here or there. We're helping investors with their goals and help planning those goals. Our business is centered around investors in healthcare, investors in the education system, and we actually partner with a local bank with 6 branches. We handle about $400 million in assets under care.
That's great. Nice, good sized business. It's certainly impressive what you've built. I'm curious because your background, when we think about the industry landscape, we oftentimes describe it as like a spectrum where you have captive models on the left side of the spectrum and independent models on the right side of the spectrum. And usually we see advisors go from the left to the right, meaning from a captive model. And over time, they migrate towards more independent models. And that seems to mirror your progression in wealth management, starting at Merrill and then Edward Jones, which I would consider a regional firm, and obviously ultimately ending up in the world of independence. That's a lot to unpack, but can you just walk us through that journey? Maybe tell it in your own words.
Absolutely, Jason. Thank you. So I started in Merrill Lynch in the Bay Area in California. I was an intern and I worked really hard. I didn't make any compensation. I worked out Outback Steakhouse at night to make ends meet. And I showed them I had strong work ethic. When it was time to get hired, right around the tech bubble that burst in 2000, I got a job. I was very lucky. I got a job as a client associate. It was a supportive role. I was an administrator and I served about 6 advisors. I helped them. I worked really hard. I got licensed and I got an opportunity to go into management. I was one of the youngest in the firm. There was 150,000 employees. I had 65 employees under me and I was their superior, so to speak, from a supervisory standpoint. They taught me how to speak to people directly. I had to hire, I had to terminate employees due to cause, and I had to travel a lot. So it taught me humility. It taught me how to be honest. It taught me how to look at people in their eyes when I speak to them. And it was great. And I earned a reputation. I got another opportunity to become a financial analyst. There was an advisor at Alliance Bernstein that moved to Merrill Lynch, and I was going to be on his team. So they said, why don't you be his financial analyst with another gentleman? And I learned the ropes and I learned the background and the qualitative and quantitative side of the business in terms of building out portfolios and understanding how risk works. I did that, but I never had a sales role. And I always felt like I was always a secondary person in the relationship. I wanted to be the primary one. I yearned for it. And that was at that time where I went to Edward Jones back in 2009. I knocked on 8,000 doors over 10 years. I went from knocking on doors and making a minimum wage to finishing in the top 50 advisors out of about 19,000 in terms of revenue and client service feedback. And it was then where I knew that independence was knocking on my door. I can do this myself and I can create my own policies and run a team and build a team.
Love it. It's a really cool story. There's a lot to unpack there, starting with the Outback Steakhouse. I'm kidding, but that's a very cool story
right.
there. I actually love that in your Merrill experience, you got to see the business from a lot of different perspectives. So I think that gives you a unique sort of empathy almost for all that goes into a wealth business, from the client associates to the managers. And that is a common refrain as well, that advisors ultimately, or I should say, junior advisors or servicing advisors, or in some cases, even client associates, oftentimes feel as you did, where you're building somebody else's dream. And if you have the chops and if you have the appetite to really go and sell and be a killer, at some point, it's pretty common to see people make the move that you made. And I get it. It's scary. It's risky. And as you said, it ended up being 8,000 door knocks, which is incredibly cool that you basically self-sourced and self-built this business from the ground up. I want to talk a little bit about, we have a large contingent of Edward Jones advisors that listen into the show. So I certainly want to talk a little bit about your experience. Let's spend the lion's share of the time talking about your current firm. Starting with Jones, can you talk a little bit about, Jones is a very interesting culture. A lot of advisors very protective of it, enjoy working there, incredibly grateful to the firm for building, in some cases, huge books of business. How did you reconcile leaving all of that behind?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jason. That firm to me was incredible. In 2009, I went to St. Louis and I had a hotel stay with other trainees and I actually would share a room with them. And I thought that was a bit strange, but in hindsight, it was very cost effective. The economics made sense. And they would actually pull out a door on wheels. We were training to how to address objections at the door, which for most people, not advisors, for anyone, it's a very tall task to have to speak to someone on the fly when you're at their door in an invasive setting without any notice and not knowing where you stand. But at the time, it was excellent training. The firm was very hands-on with us. If there was any firm in the industry that would be considered wholesome, to me, it would be Edward Jones. And I really grew to love such a great firm. And I have nothing but great things to say about that firm, even at this time. But I can tell you that when I left, the culture did change. The economics were still the same. as when I was a level new advisor to a level 10 advisor. The economics were still the same, I was relatively speaking, but it was exciting concept for me to take my life's work and have some enterprise value down the road. That was missing. And I knew that down the road, my sort of business, if you will, would be significant from a standpoint of having great relationships and providing a revenue to allow us to continue to serve investors. And I wanted to have the benefit of my life work down the road. And that was a little bit hazy at Edward Jones.
And that's true, by the way, of just about every employee model, right? That's a reality that a lot of W-2 captive advisors face, which is that they've built incredible books of business that have real value. There's obviously real appetite. And especially for those advisors that have entrepreneurial spirit, as it sounds like you do, a lot of times it's not so much about the pushes, the things that are frustrating you or forcing you out the door, as it is about the pulls, the things that are drawing you to, in your case, better client service, ability to earn a better wage, and ultimately monetize the business. So completely get that. But with all that said, are there things that you miss about Jones? Maybe it's a piece of technology, the ease of the tech stack being all integrated. I'm making these up, but anything that you miss?
Yeah, absolutely. There was things I missed, specifically two things. One, we had great camaraderie. There was a regional meeting every year in the summer where all our families would get together. We would share a cocktail, a story. We would have dinner together. Our children would commingle. That was really a great part of the culture. I do miss that part. And I was thinking about reestablishing that at GFI Wealth Partners to have sort of a family event in legacy, so to speak, or basically just to commemorate that type of environment. It was really great. And at that time, it was almost a hook. You almost wanted to stay there just for that reason. And then the second thing was comfort. Comfort is deadly sometimes, as you said, killer, but it was very comfortable. We all make it comfortable living at Edward Jones. We all served our clients well from a standpoint of the products and services that they offered. I left at 3:00 every day, market close. And I enjoyed the whole afternoon because I had control of that as a W-2 channeled employee. Now, as the CEO of GFI Wealth Partners, sometimes I don't leave at 3:00. There's a lot of my employees that need me, clients who need me after work. I'm going to events in Chicago to meet with other business leaders, which is really exciting and great, but it doesn't have the same ease as it did at Edward Jones.
Yeah, I love that answer because I think people miss sometimes. Like I sometimes make the joke, independence is what the name implies. I think people miss that sometimes, that they understand conceptually, I want to be left alone and I want to own my equity and I want to build enterprise value and all that is the positives. That's great. But it also entails a burden and a responsibility, which you're alluding to. It's not for the faint of heart. I think we can leave it at that and agree on that point. Tell me now about when you actually went to move the book of business out of Jones. What was that process like? And you don't have to get too technical, but generally speaking, was the book portable? And did you find that process, I don't want to say easy because I know it's never easy, but somewhat seamless?
Yeah, Jason, that's a great question too. I did the mirror test. I'm going to bring that up a couple times in this talk. The mirror test was I looked in the mirror and I said, if I left this firm and I started my own, what is the probabilities and what is the scope of investors that would follow? And it really was, to me, are the clients with me for me or are the clients with me for my broker dealer? So I was the first level 10 to leave voluntarily the region I was with at Edward Jones since 1981. No one
Wow.
that was advanced in terms of their revenue and their tenure at a firm at Edward Jones in that region left. There was no reason. So the region was very shocked. It was methodical. My transition was methodical. I was very on top of it. I was super prepared. Raymond James, the custodian broker dealer I work with today, was prepared me extremely for this transition. And so what I did was when I moved, I had a realtor out of California. I had an attorney out of New York. I had to keep it very quiet as a non-protocol move. I couldn't take any client information with me. Lucky for me, I met all my investors, 90% of them at the door. So I knew where they were. I knew how to get a hold of them through using a service to find their numbers, everything that was legitimate. And in the first 3 days, I transitioned on 6/15/22, which was a Wednesday. By Friday, I contacted over 200 households. And it was me staying up literally from 6 in the morning, contacting investors till about 9 or 10 at night. And I did that. And it was so rewarding in hindsight. It was about 2-3 weeks of tough duration. And then really it became very business as usual. It took me probably about 3 to 6 months to transition investors over. At the end of it, there was the mid 90s that came over in terms of percentage. And my expectation was more 75%. So there was a great outcome there.
It's extraordinary. I want to ask you, just getting a little bit detailed here, at what point in time did you feel like, okay, I got this? Like, I think people worry about that they're going to be fighting the good fight for 2 years after the move to independence. Was there a moment you remember, maybe it was after those 3 weeks or maybe after 3 months or 6 months, when you were like, okay, I know what I'm doing and this feels like the right move?
Yeah, that was a great question. It brought up some feelings when you asked that, Jason. There was a time where I would say about half of my investor book came over, and the economics of independence versus W-2 channel is very different. So the economics is much more favorable on this new side. It doesn't take much of a percentage, frankly, to get to where you were back in the day, which is unbelievable. And when I talk to advisors today that are interested in coming GFI, one of my struggles is they don't believe me because the economics are so different, apples to oranges, in terms of you're taking independence, you're taking added risk, you're taking entrepreneurial risk, you're taking the liability of people following you, and you get rewarded with it financially. So at that point, at about 50% of my investors coming over, I think my income was about the same. My revenue was about the same.
I want to just explain that for those who may not be familiar with what you're describing. What Glenn is referring to is the idea that even if you move only 50, 60, 70% of the book, which would be a pretty low portability number, because of the way payouts work in the independent space, your net take-home pay, even on half the book, exceeded your take-home pay on what was 100% of the book at Jones. Is that more or less what you're saying?
That is what I'm saying. And that's tough to believe. But Jason, that's exactly what it is.
Absolutely. I have this conversation all day, every day. There's no question about it. The economics of independence. And honestly, that's only talking about the ongoing payout. And I know you said this at the beginning. That's to say nothing of the fact that then you own the equity in the business, which obviously based on where you've seen private equity and other RIAs buy independent businesses, that's where the real monetization event occurs, right? We haven't even spoken about the back end ability to sell this thing when that time comes. I know you're young and have a lot of runway ahead of you, but when that time comes, the ability to sell this business is another bite at the apple, a very significant one at that.
100%. It gives you meaningful work for your life's work. And also, we don't even talk about the tax advantages of being an independent business owner, or a pure 1099 is very different than being a W-2 on the net basis.
Totally agree. Okay, so that's, in my mind at least anyway, more of what's in it for Glenn, which I think is a very fair way to think about the move. But I'm also curious from a client service perspective, are there specific things that you can do now that you couldn't do within the confines of Jones? The common examples we hear are like people starting a podcast, for example.
Absolutely. Great point, Jason. Those kind of things, those media things, those things that are very compliant. There's still compliance, obviously, in the independent channel, but you're an independent business. You're not confined by the policies of a W-2 channel or company, corporation. Some of the biggest things that I see, some of the biggest advantages that I have that I didn't have at Jones in terms of confinement, was building a team the way I see it, the way I want it. At Edward Jones, there's 3 or 4 or 5 titles, maybe tops, maybe less, where you can, if you fit in. Here, I can create a title that mimics the strengths and the opportunities and the desires of an individual employee of mine, and I can put them in that role. I can also use my skill set and my training ability of other employees to help them streamline them and get them promoted. I can also pay them more because my payout is different. I have the ability to pay more, which is really amazing, and I do it. Revenue sharing, we can share revenue here at Edward Jones. I'm pretty sure can't do that, where basically we can partner with other banks and other institutions to share in revenue and grow both of our businesses and help all those clients that are in there. We can purchase real estate. I own my own space. I have a 3,200 square foot space with about 8 offices, and I own it, which is amazing. At Edward Jones, I was told multiple times I couldn't own this, couldn't own this. I had to confide and I had to be a renter or a tenant of their ownership. I can offer significant discounts. I have an investor who has a significant portfolio out of state. And some of the business that I earned for them was me allowing myself to significantly discount, if it made sense, that kind of economies of scale where I was confined in a sort of time, in a band at Edward Jones. Also, we have access to a lot of alternative investments and separately managed accounts, which wealthy investors really are fond of. I have much more outcome here. I can do private equity. I can do hedge fund deals. I can do private credit. I can do an array of separately managed accounts. And lastly, I can take discretion. I am a discretionary manager here. I can take discretion on portfolios, based on some hurdles we have to take care of here. But I have all those characteristics and all those qualifications to take discretion for investors that don't want to be bothered. That's a streamlined way of investing and rebalancing that takes time into account and allows investors to really lean on us.
That might be the most thorough and well thought out answer to that question I've ever heard. Honestly, I love how you touched on it from multiple different angles, your team and your employees, your clients. And my favorite line, I don't even know that you said it, but my favorite line was when you said, me allowing myself to discount a client. And that's such an interesting way of framing the independent space because it's so true. It's you as the CEO. And ultimately, while you do have compliance because you're affiliated with Raymond James, the buck stops with you. And that's such a unique mindset shift, I think, that a lot of W-2 advisors just can't wrap their head around, or at least take some time because they're so accustomed to working for the man and having very strict parameters, almost to the point where some advisors think that's the rules. And they're surprised to realize, no, that's not a rule. That's your firm's policy. So I
Correct.
love that answer.
Thank you.
Yeah. So let's talk now. I think culture, you mentioned, is obviously one thing that a lot of Jones advisors miss. The technology is generally considered a pain point, but I wonder because a lot of independent advisors will say, while the technology in the independent space is good, it's oftentimes the Silicon Valley cutting edge tech. Sometimes the feedback is that it's not all that well integrated. Was that part of why you opted for like the Raymond James type of model because you just felt the tech stack and the ease of doing business was better?
Yeah, Jason, anyone who really knows me intimately knows that one of my Achilles heels is technology. I was born in a time, there's articles written where people like me had a pager in college. And so I lack sometimes the technology wherewithal to even know if I have great technology or not, if I'm being very truthful. But the technology here is far and away more advanced and a little bit more user-friendly. And I would say that the big thing that is different for me is the culture I created. The policies are decided by all employees. We have team meetings every month where policies are brought up. I've created also an officers meeting where half of our staff are officers, either in a director or vice president role. We have a pre-meeting to our meeting to discuss big policies, how we're going to share them, how we're going to bring them up to our group. But that new culture I created involves things as simple as branding our own clothing, which is a weird, small, silly thing to talk about. But I wear on the weekend a GFI shirt, and I think that's awesome. And it's not a Raymond James shirt. It's a GFI Wealth Partners shirt. And I bought all this swag, so to speak, for my employees. And subconsciously, maybe it's a little bit of marketing, but everyone feels empowered wearing it and proud. And I didn't always feel that way at the end of my career at the old predecessors I worked for, where now I feel proud to wear that clothing, and you can brand that clothing as sort of part of your culture.
It's a very cool answer. My main takeaway here is I'll be expecting a GFI shirt in the mail, but we can talk about that offline.
You got it.
All right, so let's shift gears now. Let's talk about your current chapter. You opted for the independent broker-dealer model, Raymond James Financial Services. Did you look at any RIA type models? Did you look at other independent broker-dealers? Tell me what that decision process was like for you. Or was it really just Raymond James felt like the right fit and it was that simple?
Yeah. And an endorsement to you, Jason, I listen to Diamond podcast often in my search for a transition. I felt like you guys asked very poignant questions when you interviewed very accomplished people that were admired by me. And so it was very helpful. Your podcast really helped me out in terms of adjusting all my ideas. They were all over the place and honing them into a more of a narrow focus.
Thrilled to hear that.
Absolutely. I mean it. But the transition was scary. It was very scary. I was nervous, Jason. I'm a nervous guy, as it seems, but I knew this was right, but I was nervous to take the step. But I always move forward in things. And as a W-2 channel, so to speak, going into independence, it was scary. I felt like Raymond James Financial Services was a natural move to me for broker-dealer without going too extreme. All the other sort of avenues or channels was a bridge too far for me at the time. But I also knew that Raymond James, unlike other firms, has the ability for me to slide to the RIA channel, Registered Investment Advisor channel. They have a W-2 channel, an independent business channel, and an RIA channel. So if I do get the desire to go into that channel, I'm able to do that without having to move all of my investors again.
That's a very common answer with models like Raymond James, where increasingly advisors want choice. And affiliation choice is a common one. There are not that many firms, but it's a growing list of firms that offer choices like you're describing, where advisors have the ability to slide with less friction than a full repaper or a full transition from one channel to the other. So in your case, it's probably unlikely you'll move back to a W-2 channel, but certainly the idea that you might end up in the RIA space one day is completely reasonable. I,
Absolutely.
I was going to ask about your client reaction to the move, but I think you told me the portability stats and they speak for themselves. So maybe I'll ask it in a slightly different way. Did anybody ask you, so you're knocking on doors or calling your clients after you make this transition in 2022? Did anybody say, why did you do this? Or what are you thinking? Like, what was the client reception, generally speaking?
Yeah, that's a good one. I remember that very well. It was mixed, Jason. I got responses like, I'm so sorry, or it's about time, or congratulations. So
Wow.
all across the board. It was my feelings of transition increased. And I want to make note, when I earned the Drucker Council Award, awarded to the top 50 advisors in revenue and client service feedback, we were in the region for 13 years at Edward Jones. I think 11 or 12 of the 13 years, we were number one in the region in client service feedback. And the mirror test, really me looking at the mirror saying, will clients transition with me if I move, was really strong as a result of that. The investors that said, I'm so sorry, or yeah, I'm so sorry, I would say, no, this is a really exciting move for me and you, potentially. I had to be very careful because there were announcements. I didn't go to anyone's house. I wasn't allowed to. I applied to a service to get telephone numbers. I was allowed to do that, but I couldn't take any information from Edward Jones. So it's about time. It was surprising to me, that response, because I didn't know those clients were even thinking I was going to create my own business. And then the ones that said congratulations just left me with a warm feeling that those are my true advocates.
I love that. And you may not remember this, but do you remember how you articulated it? I'm curious. Did you say, I'm launching an independent business with
Yeah.
Raymond James? What was
Yeah.
the wording you used?
Yeah, the wording was very, very real for me. It was, hi, Mr. Investor. This is Glenn Israel. I just wanted to announce that I have left Edward Jones. And I was saying it just like that, quiet, loud, clear, slow. And then I had to wait for response. If those investors engage with me and say, how do I move with you? I was able to re-engage with them. If they asked me, oh, you did? I could only listen to them. I wasn't allowed to solicit and bring them in. I would have to wait for them to say something.
Yeah.
If it was a voicemail, I could not leave a voicemail. If they were at home, I couldn't leave a home. And to this day, almost 3 years later, there's a handful of investors I never connected with. It's just the
Wow.
way the business works.
So I assume part of this move around your transition, you mentioned all of the benefits of independence. Has anything stuck in your side as, this isn't what I signed up for? Are there any negative surprises, is maybe what I'm asking?
I don't think there's any negative surprises. The amount of work I'm doing today is in time larger than it was at Edward Jones at the end, but I was getting a little bit lazy in my mind at Edward Jones from a standpoint of bringing in new clients and investors. I was doing very well. I was naturally getting a lot of referral business, and I was getting a little bit light on my laurels with it. Here, I have to earn the business and get out there. I have to train. I'm training a new advisor in my office. He's doing wonderfully. He's been here 6 months. He's knocking on doors today, actually. He's been doing that as a tribute to Edward Jones. We have to get licensed to do that. I help him do some role playing, but there's nothing really that it's amazing. This transition was successful. And one of the defining acts was that there's nothing I regret. I feel like my move was 100% warranted and it's proved well. I'm able to serve my clients better at cheaper cost, if you will. And I think it's a win-win in every avenue.
That's an awesome answer. And let me ask you then, so people I think sometimes think of a move, especially a breakaway move, which is what I define as a move from a captive W-2 channel to an independent channel, which is what you did. I think people think about that type of move almost in 3 phases, where you've got the pre-move transition planning and due diligence, which you've obviously completed. You've got the initial transitioning of the book, which you are largely through, I would assume at this point, where you're really up and running and humming. And then it's the, let's go out and grow this thing and be killers. What is the third chapter look like for you? Like, what is your plan now to grow it, to make this even more successful? I'm curious if there's things you're excited about.
Yeah, that's great, Jason. In terms of growth, it can be organic and non-organic. So organic is us actually growing our investors, deepening our current clients, adding new clients. And that's something we plan doing. I've been bringing in over $20 million a year since I started this back in 2010, 11. So naturally speaking, I just happen to bring in a lot of assets. I have another partner who's been in the industry 10 years. And last year, just him and I brought in over $55 million, which isn't bad for 2 guys in Northwest Indiana. But our goal in 10 years is to be well north of $1 billion in assets, a dozen of us or more running GFI Wealth Partners, possibly in multiple locations with significant enterprise value. And that's our selfish outlook. Our client's outlook is that our clients are enjoying their precious time, because time is the equalizer for all of us, right? And they're happy to pay for the human touch that we provide in a world that's very automated. We know you can go online and do it for less cost, but are you going to make a decision based on emotions? Are you going to do something that is irrevocable in some ways to you? And we basically help you make some really reasonable decisions, and clients are happy to pay for it. We hope that continues. We know it will, if we continue to be the honest, forthcoming, straightforward selves that we've been in our whole careers.
No, that makes sense. I have two follow-up questions to that. First off, any plans, and it sounds like you've already started this, but is your hope that you can recruit other advisors from various firms across the industry to plug into your firm? And if so, I assume you understand just how competitive the landscape is for recruiting advisors. So what does that pitch sound like? Tell me, what is the compelling reason why an advisor might join GFI Wealth Partners instead of just starting their own independent practice?
Excellent question. And sorry, I did talk about inorganic growth. Inorganic growth being able to bring new advisors here and to automatically grow the business by means of doing that. There is so many reasons to come to GFI Wealth Partners for local advisors. One of them, especially, I did all the big heavy lifting in starting this thing and the unknowns of it and not having terrible support in doing it. Raymond James is super supportive, but it was just my administrator and I that came over in 2022. For new advisors that come over, we love that idea, obviously from an inorganic growth standpoint, but the new advisor has a streamlined process all ready for them. From pre-training to actually the day coming in to the months subsequent, we are going to be there night and day, weekend and weekday, helping them to make sure that the transition is super successful. They can lean on us. They don't have to carry all the liability of me being the owner, and all the economics make sense. The offerings to the clients make sense. The flexibility of me saying, you can stay here, you can work from home some days, all those things. If people have families and they need to be away, they have that freedom. I'm not micromanaging them. There's just so many reasons to come on in, plug and play into a streamlined process that was started 3 years ago and is moving quickly.
I actually think that's a really nice kind of inflection point where, because the reality is, if you've been an independent business for 20 years, by the time an advisor now joins you, I think they have the feeling like, I'm not a founder, I'm not a partner in this business. It's almost like I'm joining an already existing firm. But 3 years, I think you're still at the point where a new advisor could have a real voice in shaping the firm, presumably in owning some of the firm. I think there's a lot to like about the way you've approached this. My other follow-up question, though, was around, so you've mentioned a number of times now, enterprise value, M&A, building something that you own. So I think to a lot of advisors, that's something of a nebulous concept. And what I mean by that is they believe it conceptually. Like, okay, I see that KKR just bought into Beacon Point for some crazy multiple, and I see all these other RIAs selling for eye-popping numbers. But it still feels like something that's so far away and hazy. Like, am I really going to be able to sell this thing? So I guess my question for you is, have you even thought about it? Like, is this on your radar, or is this more about, we just want to build this thing to be the best possible business, knowing that if we ever need to sell this, it's an asset that will be worth something tremendous?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jason. I had the struggles with that a bit because I do have 3 children. I have great employees. I have, so to speak, a junior partner. All these kind of things are unknown as to how that's going to play out down the road. But I'm a proactive guy, Jason. I have 2 people I speak to, one in Chicago and one in California, who've already talked to me. I've gotten actually a soft offer already, and I'm not ready at all to sell, but that is very much on my radar. I am building my business the way that it should be built. Incidentally, if it's attractive to a buyer, that's great. I'm not doing the other way around. I feel like that would be a little bit unethical. 95% of our investors are in managed kind of accounts that sort of provide a revenue stream that's very attractive to private equity firms, as you said, and other buyers. But yeah, absolutely. The goal down the road is some kind of combination of selling, or if one or all 3 of my children are competent, maybe doing some kind of partnership with them. If my employees are interested, including them, I'm a very open guy to it. I'm in a very good place because of that, where I can do the right thing for my clients and for my family and for my employees. And I plan on doing that.
And the beauty, I think, of what you're describing is you don't really have to have all the answers right now. Like, you don't have to know exactly where this is going. And especially because you're building the business the way you believe the business should be built. To your point, you're not building it for sale or building it so that buyers find it more attractive. You're building a business the right way. And in doing so, the end result is that buyers will find it more attractive. So I think that's the right perspective to have on this. And yeah, a lot of advisors I think that will resonate with, especially advisors who have kids. And yeah, you hit the nail on the head. It's usually competence and also interest, right? You can have the most competent children in the world, and if they're not interested in joining the business, perhaps you have to consider selling it down the line. Let me just wrap up with one final question to ask you. A lot of our listeners feel like you, and honestly, I do too. This would make me nervous. And a lot of our financial advisor listeners think about a move like this where you're literally upending your livelihood, your life's work, and it's scary. You use the term, I can't remember if you said scary or anxious. So for people who are on the fence and considering this, but just have that almost like inertia or paralysis, what would you say to them?
Yeah, that's a wonderful ending question, Jason. Life is so temporary. And I mean that it's intended to be said in a sanguine or optimistic way, not as a negative way. Work life is super important, but should be secondary to things like health, family, and faith. I think we would all agree with that. We don't always practice that, but go explore what's out there. Nothing really is irrevocable. There's nothing out there that's going to be devastating if you have the gumption and believe in yourself. At Edward Jones, comfortability is what keeps us from new experiences. I enjoy being uncomfortable, Jason, and taking a risk on myself. And I think there's others out there that would too, if they take a step back and think about it. It really paid off for me. Now I have, as you would say, and the Diamond consultants would say, I have greater freedom, flexibility, and control.
First of all, thank you for being a fan and an endorser of our podcast, because honestly, this is exactly why we launched the series. We recently launched our 300th episode, and this is exactly why we launched it, was to provide basically arm's length education to advisors who just want to get an interesting perspective, and yours was incredibly interesting. So I thank you so much for joining us. I can't wait to have you back on the show in 2030 to talk about the 5-year update of GFI.
Jason, it was such a pleasure to be on the show and such an opportunity to get the word out. Thank you so much for all the help to get me here. That was a lot on you guys as well. And I hope others listen to this and form some great ideas and move forward in their lives too.
Thanks, Glenn.
As a financial advisor, you hold yourself to the highest standards of integrity, honesty, and credibility. You are successful because you take your professional responsibilities seriously and are dedicated to your clients. But are you living your best business life? Are your goals aligned with your firm's, or could a better option exist? Should I Stay or Should I Go is a book written with you in mind. It's a self-guided journey that walks you through the key steps that we take with our advisor clients. This strategic thought process and roadmap to professional self-discovery is designed to help you ask the right questions and think critically and objectively, whether you're considering change or not. Learn how to get your copy at diamond-consultants.com/thebook.